As has been announced last week, Jeff is at a conference tonight. So he'll be back he'll be back next Wednesday night and pick back up in John, but that's right in John 13, 14, that area. So not trying to get away from John, but not trying to, do Jeff's lessons for him. I wanted to go back to kind of almost the beginning and just really talk about, what I want to talk about tonight is some people, right? The passage, though, that I have on the screen is in John chapter 3, verses 20 and 21. Most of us know John chapter 3, verse 16, and the statement there that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. But later on there, in the rest of that, the statement is about this light, right? And that's a reminder, at least for me, to go back to chapter 1. Because in John chapter 1, when in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, it talks about that this is a light shining in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it, or wasn't able to do anything. And so here you have again this other statement of light. But the thing that I like about this particular statement that for me that stands out is this idea, but whoever does what is true comes to the light. That the light of God attracts those that want to be true to what God says, right? That's attractive. The truth of God is attractive to people who want to be true. Does that make sense? Right? Because if we don't want to be true, then truth isn't attractive. That's going to be a topic that comes up in our James class, right? When we're talking about temptation and we're drawn away by our own desires. So we have to ask the question, what do we desire? People who desire truth come to the light. And that's kind of what we're going to see tonight. At least that's what I'm going to try to do with the three people that we talk about in John chapters 3 and chapters 4. So the next part of this is that we're going to talk about these encounters with people, with individuals. And we're not going to be at all able to cover everything that Jesus teaches to these individuals. At least the first two, right? There's in the third individual that we're going to talk about, there's no real teaching. But when we talk about the first two individuals here in John chapter 3 and John chapter 4, Jesus does a lot of teaching. We can't cover that teaching. But we're going to want to talk about the circumstances of the encounter. And so in John chapter 20, beginning in verse 30, John gives us there at that end that summary statement that's also a purpose statement, that Jesus did many other signs which are not written in this book, or that he did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And so when we look at encounters here, right, that's what we want to look at. We want to look at this driving force of the gospel of belief, right? That's one of the things that can become difficult about trying to preach or teach the gospel of John, is because every lesson comes down to believe, right? That's because that's what the book is about. And so we have to. I want us tonight to think about it. One, from our encounter, right? Us coming to the light in whatever various ways that we need to do that, especially when we stray into the darkness, recognizing that Jesus is the light. But other seekers, how do we do, what do we do, how do we then approach them also. So the three encounters, and this is kind of, the objectives for tonight, is to look at Nicodemus, the Samaritan woman by the well, and the official or the nobleman that's at the end of John chapter 4. So Nicodemus at the beginning of John chapter 3. We have the Samaritan woman at the beginning of John chapter 4. And then we have the nobleman or this official that is at the end of John chapter 4. And those are the three that I want to try to look at tonight. And in our objectives, looking at these three, we want to look at who they are and look at the interaction between them as far as the personal side. Part of this is a combination of several lessons that I did years ago that came out of some stuff that we worked on with one of the elders in a men's class that was talking about crowd and core, right? That you have crowd situations where there's things that you can say, and then there's core situations, right? When you're dealing one-on-one or when you're dealing in small groups, where there's some depth that you can go into. And so you have to balance those kind of situations, and that's where some of this stems from. But there's an interesting kind of underlying theme, and that's why I want to move and hopefully get to the nobleman as quickly as possible and then back up and think again about Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman after we kind of spend some time almost seeming like we're rushing to the nobleman, but then we'll back up. But most of this is known or knowable, and what we want to look at is what were the results of these encounters, what were some of the reactions that surrounded the encounters, and then ultimately what encouragement that we might be able to gain from today. So the statement that I have up there in John chapter 12, if you go back and you think about the John chapter 3 statement, what do you need to do to see? You need light, right? That's the primary thing that our eyes do, is they process light. That's the little cells in there, the little rods and cones, that's what they do, right? They react to light. And that light is then processed, and then we come up with what we see. But in Christianity, we understand that we walk by faith and not by sight. So the visual sight, right, when we wish to see Jesus, right, I'm not going to see physical Jesus today, right, unless the Lord returns. That's not what we're looking to see. But in the encounters, the light that He shines, and do we see Him in the midst of them? So that's kind of going to be our driving theme. So before we then dive into the rest of it, really long introduction, but hopefully that'll motivate us to stick with our studies tonight. Let's take a moment and have a word of prayer. Our great God and Father, as we open your word tonight, help us to be enlightened about who your Son is and the grace and the mercy that He extends to us through the words that He speaks, but also the life that He demonstrates, that we might take the encouragement from this to go into the encounters that we have in life and might better show forth the light of your word. Be with us in this study and those that seek to know your truth. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So if you look there in John chapter 3, most of us kind of know the story of Nicodemus, right? Most of us kind of know the story of Nicodemus. So after certain things have happened in Jerusalem, Nicodemus comes to him by night. So Nicodemus, or John chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, and no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. So let's just, again, who is this person, right? Well, we as kind of Bible students quickly learn things really fast, right? We know, one, he's a man, right? And that's important. It's going to be important for the next one, right? But it also says he's a Pharisee and he's a ruler. Okay, so the Pharisees were a group that, right, they tried to strictly follow the law, right? They were very knowledgeable. They were very devout. In verse 10, I think I have up there underneath ruler, it says that he's a teacher, right? Jesus confronts him, you're a teacher, know you not these things? But a lot of what they taught were traditions, right? And we don't know exactly what all of those traditions were. Some of them are brought to our attention in the New Testament because Jesus brings them out or something like that. In about AD 200, there's a guy who writes a bunch of them down. And that's called the Mishnah, right? So a lot of the times we, as preachers and teachers, we may talk about rabbinic tradition, but sometimes what we're referencing is this document that's like 200 years after Jesus, right? But they talk about, there's a commentary that gets written around it, and that takes another couple of hundred years. So it's not until about AD 600 that you get a complete Talmud document. But it's just interesting that they had these traditions, but the idea behind their traditions is that they were trying to set a hedge around the law. So the law said this, so we'll come up with a tradition that if you don't come this far where our tradition is, there's no way you can ever get to break the law, right? And so that was kind of their idea, except they would come up with exceptions, right? So they were good at that. But that's some of what we know about him. He's a Pharisee, so he's knowledgeable, he's devout, but he teaches these traditions that he thinks are a way to increase righteousness, right? Jesus makes that a theme in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, right? Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees. But he's also a ruler, so he has a lot of respect and prestige. What were the rulers? Right? These were the members of the Sanhedrin, right? These were the elders. So this harkens all the way back to Moses and the 70 elders of Israel, right? And during the Maccabean time, that becomes this official court of Israel. They name it this Sanhedrin. And this was the way that Rome interacted with Israel, right? Israel, right, the people, the Jews had this population in Judea and Samaria, and they had also this population up in Galilee. Well, that's crossing jurisdictions and everything like that, so they dealt with the Sanhedrin, right? This was the rulers of the Jewish people. Also, they were kind of nominally in control of Judea and Samaria, at least those Jewish sections of it. But we also found out that he's wealthy, right? In John chapter 19, at Jesus' burial, he brings, depending on the version, it's about 100 Roman measures, which works out to be about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. That's a lot, right? I don't know, they were bringing in paper supplies that looked like paper towels to put in the bathroom and stuff like that. And there were multiple boxes. I don't know if that was 75 pounds, but it was multiple. 75 pounds is a lot, right? So he had to have some wealth to be able to come up with that, right? But he's interested. Sometimes we make a deal out of he came by night, but he came, right? Whether he comes during the day, comes by night, whatever. He's coming out of darkness no matter if it's day or night, and he's coming to the light, right? He's trying to get out of the darkness that he's in, and he wants to know what's going on. Nobody. All of these righteous people I hang out with all the time can't do the kind of stuff that you're doing, and they certainly don't teach the way that you teach. What's going on? And he wants to know, right? He wants to know. And so he's given some answers, and he doesn't dismiss it. We don't know, right? I bring up in John chapter 7 and verses 50 and 51, the Sanhedrin they're trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Let's arrest Jesus. Let's get rid of him, all this other kind of stuff. And he still is there kind of standing up, right? We've already condemned him without a trial. Oh, you must be one of his followers, whatever. Anyway, I'm just saying that he never gives up, right? And so that's something to think about when we think about Nicodemus. So, I meant to put this up. I was going to do this before. I don't know how much of that you can see. This is an artist's rendition of the temple court. So that little building, I don't know if I can get this to work, right? But this little building right here, right? So just that would be the temple portion. And then this area right here would be where the sacrifices were. This area right here is what's called, when they refer to the court of the women, right? So this is there was a gate that's right here and some steps that go up to there. And so that's as far as they could go. And then there's this little barrier that's right there. You can see it was a low wall. And then everything outside of it on this side and then way back over here, that's all the court of the Gentiles. So the Gentiles weren't supposed to cross that little barrier that's right there. But what I want you to notice is how huge this area is, right? It is this thing down here, that's almost 1,000 feet across from there to there. And it's about 1,500 feet this way. So this was a huge platform with the temple in the center of it. So when it talks about Jesus cleansing the temple and casting out the money changer, they're not up here, right? They're back down in this area, the money changers and stuff. Or they're back over here. They're probably in the stoa, at least that's what they think. We don't know for sure. And when you hear about the Western Wall, that's over here. So this is a big platform that's hundreds of feet up, and the Western Wall is the back side of that. That's all that's left, is this big wall that led up to where the temple sat. The Western Wall isn't the Western Wall of the temple. It's the Western Wall of the platform that the temple sat on.
And that's still standing, right?
The Western Wall, that's the only part of this structure that's still standing. All of this other stuff that's here they tore it all, they cast it all down. And for centuries it sat up there as a garbage dump. I didn't know that until later on. Yeah, when the Christians finally got control of Jerusalem in like AD 300 to 400, they started using it kind of as a garbage dump because it was up and the odor would blow away. So anyway, that's yeah, the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. Yeah, that's the same thing. So our next one is the Samaritan woman. Again, many of us know this portion of the story. He came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, I don't know. We're just going to say Sychar. But the notable thing about it is it's near Jacob's well. All right, so you can go back to Genesis 48, I think, right, and read the story of Jacob giving his son Joseph this plot of land that's up there. And then it says that Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, right? So we see something about the humanity of Jesus. Remember John chapter 1, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. But here he is, he's been trooping, right? He's been walking. Here's I'm going to finish the passage here. And so as he was sitting beside the well, this is Jacob's well, and it's about the 6th hour, so we understand that to be about noon. And a woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus says to her, "Give me a drink." And so we know, a lot of us know kind of the rest of the story. And the confrontation, so I'm going to, again, if you can see this, I don't know how much you can see, but he gets from Jerusalem to where he stops is about halfway between Jerusalem and Nazareth. It's about, right? We don't know exactly where the village is. We know where Jacob's well is. You can go and visit Jacob's well today. It's about 100 feet deep. You have to have something to get the water out of it, right? You have to be able to draw water out of it. And this is probably an instance where travelers would have carried a little water bucket with them. And you're thinking, a water bucket, right? It's a leather pouch, right? You have the string, you put a stick in it, you lower it down, you fill it with water, it works just fine, right? To draw water. Well, he's not with any of this stuff. She comes out to draw water. And we have to ask some questions about her, right? One, we find out she's a woman. And public discussion between men and women in this time didn't really happen, right? Part of what I do is I try to get my head around some of the prohibitions. Think Afghanistan, right? And the treatment of women. I don't know that it was necessarily that bad then as it is there now, but the relationships were quite the same, right? For a lot of Jews, their wives were property, and they justified that because you don't covet your neighbor's wife. Well, you covet people's property. So my neighbor's wife must be his property. So that was traditions of the elders there, right? Anyway, I think she's honest, though, right? When in the midst of the discussion, and he brings up living water, so there's the different picture. I know I'm not going into the depths of that, right? Because I'm more interested in the encounter right here. And she's honest because he says, "Bring your husband," and she says, "I don't have one." And he goes, "Yeah, I know you've had 5 and the one that you're with now isn't," right? So, but that raises the question, even her honesty in the midst of this situation, is she an outcast? Why is she there at noon? One, why are other women there with her going to the well to get water? Right? Why is she going about a half a mile out of the village that has some other springs around it, unless it was just the time of year that those springs were flowing? To me, I just kind of ask those questions, right? The other question I ask is, whatever else the Samaritans knew, they knew Messiah was coming. I didn't know this until like 10 years ago, and I started doing the study of it. The Samaritans still exist. As of 2024, there's only about 900 of them left. They meet still, they still consider Mount Gerizim a holy mountain. One of their problems is they don't accept converts, and they've intermarried so often that there are difficulties. So there are just not that many of them left. I never knew that. I only think of the Samaritans being this Old Testament, this New Testament thing, and then after the destruction of Jerusalem, the Samaritans just went away. Well, they didn't. I didn't know that about them. So anyway, she knew something about Messiah and apparently wants to know, and she's not dismissive either, right? She when he says, "Well, let's let everybody know about this," she brings them back. You got to go meet this guy, right? You've got to come hear what I hear and figure out what's going on with this, right? And so she ends up with a pretty interesting introduction to Jesus. Now, my question on both of these two situations right now is, was Nicodemus in the upper room when the 120 gathered? I don't know. I wonder about that. When Philip goes up to Samaria, do these Samaritans remember? I wonder about that. Right? When you read the book of Acts, and one of the first things Philip does is he says he goes up to Samaria, and I wonder about these people, if they would have heard Philip and gotten kind of the end of the story of this. Anyway, just something that sticks out to me. This last one I want to get to, and then we'll kind of do our rehearsal of all of it, is the nobleman's son. This happens later in John chapter 4. So he's gone. He stays a little time. Stays a day or two in Samaria. They get him to stay. That's breaking some barriers, right, for his disciples. They've now gone in and bought food to eat in a Samaritan village or town. They've been staying with or being associated with some Samaritans. So, I mean, there's some changing things going on that Jesus is doing. And then this next encounter is somebody, I don't know what all else is going on except his son is dying. And he's convinced that Jesus can do something about it. And it says he's an official. Now, as he came into Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine, and at Capernaum, that's about 15 to 20 miles away, depending on how you travel, right? There's an official whose son was ill, and when the man heard that Jesus had come from Judah to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So here we're kind of up now in Galilee. So the road would have come up this way. There's Nazareth, there's Cana, right? So he's coming over here from Capernaum. He's coming over, right, to see Jesus for this. Again, we don't. This one, it's not like we have a lot of teaching, except for what Jesus says, and it's almost deflating, right? I didn't have that one on the chart, right? And when he came from Judea, okay, so verse 48. So John chapter 4, verse 48. So Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Now that's y'all. What I mean is that when he says you there, it's plural. So he's not just talking to the nobleman. I'm not saying that he's not talking to the nobleman, but he's talking to all of them that are there, that are standing around, right? He came here and turned water to wine, right? Cana. He'd been gone for a while. He'd been down in Jerusalem. If you read chapter 2, John chapter 2, he did signs when he was down there. That's why Nicodemus could ask him the question, right? Who are you that you can do these things? Nobody does these signs. And remember John chapter 20, Jesus did a lot of them we don't know about, right? A bunch that we don't know about. But here this guy, he's not going to be deterred. Jesus might be like pessimistic and y'all just won't believe unless you see a sign. Sir, come down before my child dies. He's not interested in teaching. He's not interested in rebukes. He's not interested in what the crowd thinks. He has a need. Now, I've emphasized official / nobleman. This little thing that he's called by can mean everything to he's one of Herod's relatives all the way down to he's like a guy that opens the door for one of the official offices at Capernaum, right? He's a doorkeeper. So, I mean, it's a wide range, but he has servants. We learn that later, that he has servants. So he has some power and position and prestige and all of those kind of. Now think about for just a minute. Think about, we've had Nicodemus, who is a Pharisee and a ruler of the Jews, and we've had a Samaritan woman at the well. Of the children of Jacob, right? They're both children of Jacob. In whatever version we want to reference them as, they're related as descendants of Abraham. But that's the kind of the extremes. I missed that point about her. She wanted to know about worship, right? She kind of, I almost get the point. I'm messed up. Where is God? We think Mount Gerizim. Y'all think Mount Jerusalem, the mountain Sinai, or not Mount Sinai, Mount Moriah in Jerusalem or whatever. Where is God? Where? And Jesus gets to a point with her, and that's why I just kind of wonder. When Philip got up there, did they get to hear Philip, and were they able to respond? To hear what Jesus accomplished. Anyway, he's not going to be deterred. Sir, come down before my son dies, my child dies. So we had these two extremes. Here, I don't know. We kind of have somebody that's in the middle. Right? He's not a slave. He's not ultra poor. He's not an outcast. But at the same time, we don't know if he's, high up in the Herod administration somewhere. We just don't know, right? He could be, could not be. But he's having, even if you're the doorkeeper at the White House, you know a lot about the pomp and circumstance of the White House, right? And so here this guy is, he's having to go to this carpenter that's become some itinerant teacher, whatever, to get stuff done, right? Members of Herod's household probably were used to, we need this done. Oh, okay, we'll make sure it gets done. Right? You just had to kind of say stuff, and stuff would just kind of get done. And here he's having to go, he's going directly. He's not, right? He's going. He goes. He's going to make this 15 to 20 mile trek. And he's not going to, but what does Jesus say? Jesus said to him, go, your son lives. And the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. Do we? That's the lesson right there, right? What did he have? What did he have? All he had was Jesus said. What do we have today? What do we have today? Jesus says, he that repents and is baptized shall be saved. What else do we have today? But we have, and then we need to believe that, right? Believe the word that Jesus spoke, right? Because I'm not expecting a miracle. I'm not expecting for Jesus to walk in the door unless it's time for us all to go home. But I can think that he said that. I'd love to get to Acts the 16th chapter, but I'm just too long-winded, I guess, right? But what is Acts the 16th chapter? If some of you good Bible students, what is that? What is that particular passage? Acts 16, beginning in verse 25. That's the Philippian jailer. Do thyself no harm. And right? That's I don't even know how much of what Paul and Silas were singing at midnight he could understand, right? Because he probably speaks Greek and Latin. They're probably singing psalms in Aramaic or Hebrew or whatever. But he knew something was going on with them, and all Paul did was just say, "Do thyself no harm." And then, well, wait a minute. What can I do to be saved? You believe. You and all your household. He takes them that very night. He washes their stripes. They teach him the way of the Lord more fully, right? They preach Jesus. He's baptized. And then, right? Then it's like, oh, y'all want to go see them? You just want to let them go? They don't want to just go, right? Maybe you need to go talk to them before you tell them just to go. Anyway, that's kind of the other side of the story. Now you think about him, same as kind of the nobleman, right? In a similar position. There are people over him. There are people under him, right? I don't know exactly. He's keeping jail at night, right? So he's not high up in Rome's view of the world, but he wasn't somebody that was just a nobody, right? In Matthew chapter 6 at verse 33, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. All what things? All the things that are just before that he said don't worry about. Well, what was it that he just said don't worry about? What is it that he says there? Oh, be anxious for nothing. Right? Verse 25. What you will eat, what you will drink are about your body. What you will put on is not life more than food, the body more than clothing. He talks about the birds of the air. So, verse 32, oh, wait a minute, verse 31, therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all of these things. Your heavenly Father knows that you need them all, but seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you, or added to you. It's the seek and the first, because the Psalm 37:25, that's the righteous forsaken or a seed begging bread. I'm hoping that's what that passage is. But just over in Matthew the 7th chapter, right? Here's one of these. Remember, Jeff just taught on prayer, right? And one of the things was the parable from Luke, that he taught a parable that men ought always to pray and not lose heart. And the very end of that, Jesus said, will the Son of Man find faith when he comes back? Is the implication that if we quit praying, we don't have faith? I think so, right? But notice what he says here in John chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it is open. Right? Do we believe that? Yes? Mm-hmm. My only answer for Matthew, some people that disbelieve the part about Matthew 7 verses 7 and 8 is 100% when Matthew 6:33 is 100%. Right? When we're seeking first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, what we're going to be asking for and seeking for and knocking about are going to be everything that's associated with it, right? And not just on, well, this is all an introduction to the James class, so we'll be discussing that at length on Sunday mornings coming up in a couple of weeks. So that was the end of our class, correct? All right, thank you then.